tonight. We still have a few people trickling into the waiting room. We're going to give them just a couple minutes, not very long, to log in. If you're not familiar with Zoom, we will ask that if you do have questions tonight, please use the chat feature. If you don't know where that's at, if you swipe over your screen at the bottom, you'll notice there's a little icon that underneath of it says chat. If you click on that, it will open a chat dialog box that then you're able to type your question in. We have Dr. Marcy Ward and Dr. Jason Smith who are monitoring the chat session tonight, so they'll relay your questions accordingly. So again, thank you for coming out. And it looks like our waiting room is pretty well empty. So I think we will get started with our first speaker for the night, and that is Dr. Eric Scholljegerdes. He gave me the free rein to run with his bio, but at his personal risk, if you will. But I think we'll go with script. And Dr. Scholljegerdes, we're very fortunate to have him at NMSU and have him here tonight speaking. He's an associate professor at New Mexico State University. He's in the range livestock, or he is a range livestock nutritionist in the Department of Animal and Range Sciences. His area of specialty is cow-calf nutrition with an emphasis on supplementation programs to improve reproduction, but also longevity, health, and growth and performance of their offspring. He and his graduate students conduct the majority of their work at Shad's Place at the Corona Range and Livestock Research Center in Corona, New Mexico. And again, we're very lucky. They do a lot of very applied and relevant research to New Mexico. And so, Dr. Scholljegerdes, thank you for coming out tonight. We really appreciate it. And we'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Craig. Oops. As much as we do this in the university setting, we still have little hiccups. All right. Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you for those that invited me here. And just to give you a little background on myself real quick, that I grew up in Missouri and got an animal science degree there, went to the University of Wyoming and got my master's and PhD in ruminant nutrition and studied amino acid and fatty acid nutrition. And then I moved up to the frozen tundra of North Dakota, where I conducted winter grazing research. And so it probably doesn't take a genius to realize why I'm here, because there's no reason to graze in the winter in North Dakota because there's no grass there. It's all covered up with snow. And so with that, like my bio said, I conduct the vast majority of my work at the Corona Range and Livestock Research Center and work on a daily basis with Shad and Richard as far as the general management of the ranch goes. Just to give you a sense of where we're at the ranch, we started off probably in August, I guess, with about 450 cows or females, and now we're down to 150. And it's the drought that we're experiencing is just as bad as it was in 2011 and 12, and hasn't really improved at all. We're not looking overly optimistic right now for the spring either. But with that said, we have the same struggles as you guys do, and I'm just going to kind of walk you through the things that we think about. And this was a very challenging presentation to put together because I was trying to come up with new ideas and things that you guys, you've probably heard 1,000 drought talks over the course of your life, especially ranching around this country. And it really just gets back to what do I have and what do I need to get our cows through? And so I'm going to try to give you some options, show you options as to how we can make it through, but we don't want this to have long-term effects in regards to, we shorted our cows because we're just trying to make it through, and now we have offspring that are not going to perform up to their genetic potential either. And so obviously the concerns that we start off with is the pasture. Do we have available forage? And so hopefully by this time of the year, like we said, we were shipping cows like crazy, and October and November, just thinking, maybe it'll rain, maybe it'll rain. And so we feel like that 150 is going to be a sufficient number of animals that based off of the forage that we have. And it's not very good forage. And just to give you an idea, and sometimes I'm a very visual thinker. Like I said, I'm from Missouri, so it's the show me state. And so I need to be, have visual concepts of what I'm talking about. And so on average, 1,000-pound cow will eat 26 pounds of forage per day. Not many of us have that 1,000-pound cow, but that's how they define an animal unit, of course. And so roughly that looks like 5 flakes of alfalfa. Give you a rough idea of 25 pounds-ish. And, if you think about how much that she's supposed to eat, and then you can look out across the rangeland, you can see, well, I'm going to need some more country to cover her needs. But what's really important is what's there in the pasture, and how do we assess the needs of the cow and balance that with the quality or what forage is provided. And that starts off with the stage of production. Right now, most of us are getting ready to calve, or have already started calving. So we're ending or finalizing the 3rd trimester. And this is certainly the time when we don't want to be shorting our cows of anything, because we have exponential growth of that calf during that 3rd trimester. And obviously, if we short her on nutrition, when that calf is born, it's going to be have a harder road ahead of it, just because of the nutrients that it was deprived during that late gestation. And there's a lot of cool data that shows that it does impact subsequent heifer fertility and even carcass quality of the steer calves. And then, all right, we're still thinking about breeding and how do we keep those cows in the best shape that we can afford, so that we have a successful breeding season. And then, right now, all of our steer calves are likely off. Ours are gone, but most everybody's. And so we're worried about the heifers that we decided to retain, if you retained any. And then you probably are left with those, the cows, the middle-aged cows, because as you're selling animals, you're going to try to get rid of those older cows. And so within the forage, because that's what we're going to start with, I'm a cow-calf nutritionist. I'm not near as smart as my feedlot guys who know everything there is to know about their animals and what they're eating. But for us on the cow-calf grazing side, we're making our best guess estimate a lot of times, because we don't exactly know what in particular that cow is eating, and we hope that it's not a toxic plant. And so the protein and energy is what we're mainly concerned about, but we'll focus mainly on the protein, because as long as we have enough grass out there, there is the energy there, hopefully, that that animal can harness to meet her maintenance requirements. And we certainly don't want to leave out minerals and the importance of that, especially in drought-stricken pastures. We can have some potential issues with deficient mineral content. And so I'm just gonna, I think by law, I have to state certain things that you do for drought management, and the producer panel later on will do a much better job about this and giving real world examples. But obviously, earlier this year, we were talking about early weaning, and most of our calves were, past 8 weeks of age. But, it sounds like the speaker last night, I wasn't there, but I heard that it doesn't look overly optimistic for next year. And so, those calves have a fully functioning rumen by 8 weeks of age, meaning that the microflora that are present are similar to what we see in an adult animal. And so that, to me, means that, at that point, they can sustain themselves. Now, they may not look as nice as they do when they're with their mom and weaned at a normal time, but they can certainly survive if you wean them at 8 weeks of age. Any earlier than that is a little more stressful on. As far as animals to cull, who's costing us the most money? Obviously, those older cattle greater than 9 years of age, they're starting to lose some of the teeth integrity, and takes a little more to keep them going. They still have a calf, and we love those 9-year-old cows probably more than any of them, because we've been through a lot together. But those are the ones that are going to take a little more to maintain, and chances are during the drought, they're going to come up open. As much as we hate to say it, those younger cattle, those 2s and 3s are very difficult to get rebred, and we have to put a lot of special care into them. But, those are the ones we have our best genetic improvement, we hope, or made the most advantage with those. And so that hurts a little bit get rid of those. But if we're thinking about just trying to stay in business and maintain a group of animals that's the most efficient, then we have to think about those as well. But you know, I'm talking about heifers as well. And if we keep heifers, then we really need to be mindful of what they need more often than not. And then obviously the middle-aged cows are going to be our most efficient and resilient. And so those would be the ones that are going to survive this drought, and probably because they've experienced drought before. Okay. And so what are the different ideas that we have as far as stretching our supplement? And stretching the grass. So we've got grass, and we hope that we've devised our stocking rate to where it is complementary to our grass resources, but there are some things that we can do to stretch our grass resources. And so another thing that we want to do is get the most out of what we have. And so if the energy is low and the protein is low, can we add a little protein to get a little more energy out of it? And we know that supplemental protein to the cow first goes into the rumen, and those bacteria, they're trying to chug along and break down the carbohydrates or the cellulose in that grass. If we give them just a little bit of protein, it actually enhances their ability to break down that tough grass, and we get a little more energy and intake out of that grass. All right. We've got to select the correct supplement to meet the cow's needs. Is it something off of the shelf, which are fantastic and very consistent, but do we need a 20%, or do we need something with a higher protein, 32 or 38%? And then which supplement is most economical? That's probably the first question that most everybody asks. What can I afford to purchase? But if we think about these and what we need, we can then make some economic decisions based off of different options that we can find at the feed store or with our nutritionist. Okay. And it's not always found in a bag. A lot of times commodities work very well for us. They're usually priced a little lower because they don't have all of the overhead it takes to manufacture those, but we have consistency issues, and sometimes they're hard to get or get trucked in and things like that. And so there's some, different nuances within every one of these that we have to consider. Okay. And so I would like to start this off with this supplement decision guide that Clay Mathis put together. And on the bottom right-hand corner, I've got a link to it if you wanted to look at it. So I've kind of blown it up. It's a PDF, but I've blown it up to and put it onto this PowerPoint slide. And so, okay, obviously, does she have enough all she can eat in the pasture? And that's a big question that we have to ask, and we've probably already asked ourselves. So it's a simple yes or no flow diagram that Dr. Mathis put together. And so right now, most of us are probably in that no range. And so how do we address her needs? And so if forage supply is inadequate, then more than likely energy is deficient. And what I mean by that is those carbohydrates that are standing in that forage, or in that standing forage, that when you purchased the ranch, you bought the carbohydrates that animal is going to need throughout its lifetime. But if there's not enough forage out there, then technically she's deficient in energy. She doesn't have enough dry matter intake. Okay, and so we obviously have to reduce the stocking of our ranch and start to feed supplement. Okay, and so the next question is, what color is the forage? And so if it's green, we're going to supplement, not something that we're thinking about right now, but come this spring, we may have a little green up, but there won't be much of it, right? Those cows, we'll see that they start to look really good, and the performance is improving. And we do a lot of heifer development stuff at Corona, and we weigh them every 14 days. And we see that when they start chasing that green, man, their performance is just phenomenal. But then you can tell when they graze that out, because they kind of greened up and just started to green, and then they got all of that taken care of and consumed, and then their performance starts to tank again. And so that 20% cube or cake is going to have a little more energy in it than a higher protein cube. And the reason behind that is that when the feed manufacturer is putting that together, a lot of their ingredients have higher than 20% crude protein. And so they'll use other things like wheat middlings or whatever to help dilute that down to get to that 20%. And with that brings additional energy. And so if they're short on grass, and it's green, then you can use a 20%. It's going to have a little more energy than say a higher 32 or a 38%. Okay. And then these are just ballpark figures. If you just like, okay, where do I start? 0.4% of body weight to 0.8% of body weight per day, right? So you at least can estimate what your cow's body weight is. And if it's green, we're going to assume that protein is sufficient. Now, this isn't always true. Back in 2013, we had grass that looked green, but way the rainfall pattern came, that stuff grew and matured in a matter of 15 minutes. And so it looked green, but the protein quality was pretty low. And so that's something that you got to look at. But the nice thing, if I can say there's a nice thing about a drought, a lot of times the protein content of that forage stays a little stronger through that drought period, as long as it's a short term, but then eventually it'll start to decline. So our cows didn't look terribly bad this fall, and neither did the calves, even though they didn't have a lot of grass out there. All right, and so we want to talk about pricing it on $1 per pound of TDN, any kind of supplement. Okay, so now this is more of what we're all looking at when we look out the window in the morning. And so with it brown, this is earth-shattering science here, but chances are very good that the protein is deficient. All right, so you're looking for something a little more middle of the road, 20 to 28%. And I know that's sometimes hard to find, but the point being is that, you can get above that 20 to 28%. And so we're trying to balance something that has a good level of energy. And I'm not saying that the 32 to 38% cubes don't have good energy. They do for sure, but just not as high as something with a little lower protein. And we're looking at 0.3 to 0.5% of body weight per day. Now, energy is going to be deficient again. And so, we're trying to ensure that they have adequate amount of that energy because of the low quantity of forage. And this protein is likely, if it's less than 7%, usually when it's brown, it's going to fall off into that 7, 6, 5% crude protein range. That's going to limit digestion. So this is referring back to the idea that those bacteria are doing pretty well, but then once the forage falls below 7%, there's not enough available protein that they can readily access to make the enzymes they need to break down the carbohydrates. And so we have to add just a little bit of protein, and man, they do really, really well. And so obviously, as we're considering different sources, we want to look at it on $1 per pound of protein or TDN. And if it's super short, that grass, we were looking for something less than 20% crude protein. All right. And that's going to be something that, talk to your nutritionist or, one of your extension personnel. And if you have a great relationship like we do with our feed salesmen, have those conversations, and they'll get you hooked up with something that works really, really well. Okay, but it all comes down to this ultimately, and that's the cow's requirements. What are they, and what do I do with them, right? And so this is something that we put together. Craig and I have worked off of this quite a few times in the past with, here's what the recommended, and I guess you guys can see me, I got my air quotes up, recommended intake. Now in a grazing situation, that's difficult to predict, but a lot of these requirements are based off of an assumed intake. Okay, so that's why that's important. That's why I have to have that number there. So when you ask me how much protein do I need to feed these cows, I have to have some sort of idea, educated guess as to what her intake is going to be. And so this is a pretty good round number, 2.2% of body weight. If the grass is really, really tough, and maybe 2% of their body weight is what they're going to consume, but that's just a good golden start as far as predicting that. But then we've got it in the percentages, and cows don't have requirements for percentages per se, rather it's requirement for quantities. Okay, and so it's the same graph or same table, I just changed it to pounds rather than the percentages. And so, even this may not be something you can really get your mind around, because you think of it as a truckload of cube or a bale of hay, and how much protein is really there. And so those percentages will help me calculate, multiply that percentage by the dry matter intake, and gets me a quantity. Okay, so now we're getting to the point where, okay, how much are they eating in the grass? How much are they deficient? And how much supplement do I need to provide? And so I have this split out for you, and I assume you guys are going to get a copy of this if you want. If not, I'll send you a copy of it. We've got heifers that are, so pregnant heifers, and we've got mature body weight, 10 pounds of milk. And so you'll see 10 pounds versus 20 pounds here because that has an impact on their nutrient requirements and their growth characteristics. And so I've got that first calf pregnant heifer, first, second, and third trimester. And then I've got a mature cow at 10 pounds of milk and then 20 pounds of milk. And really that's only important when they're actually producing milk, right? And so that lactation and breeding is where we see some differences there as far as their dry matter requirements. And so look at the TDN. So that's total digestible nutrients. That's a term we use to characterize the energy value. And so if you go from just same weight of cow for 10 pounds of milk production to 20, you're looking at 13 pounds of TDN versus 16 pounds. You don't need to know exactly what that means. Just know that this number is significantly larger than this number. And that means she's going to take a little more care to maintain that genetic potential or allow her to achieve that genetic potential. Okay. And so we're going to do some quick math here because I think that's important for us to understand. And so the last drought that we had grass that was 3.8% crude protein. And so that's one step up from a toothpick, or maybe a step down from a toothpick. I've never run a protein on toothpick before, but I assume it's very poor. We've got dry matter intake at 26 pounds per day. And so that means she is currently, or the cows at that time were consuming 1 pound of protein. Okay, that's fine. But what should they be eating? What do we know about her protein requirements, right? I need to know that because then I can multiply it by the dry matter intake and get what her required protein intake should be. Okay, so we've got to figure out where the requirements are. If we go back to this graph, if I pull your attention down here to 7.8% crude protein is her requirement in that third trimester. All right, back to our slide. So our requirement is 7.8. Okay, so I just filled those boxes in, 7.8 times the 26, right? 1.8. And for those of you that are paying attention, I haven't put to sleep just yet, you'll notice that this dry matter intake dropped to 24, right? And before I had it at 26, but I just wanted to say, when the grass gets really, really poor in quality, you know, their intake is going to drop a little bit. And so I'm just trying to use my best guess, but there's no reason that you couldn't use this. But, you know, in reality, she probably isn't eating as much as she could because that stuff is just going to be sitting there and it takes more time for those bacteria to break it down. And so are they getting enough? Well, the requirement number is bigger than the actual intake number. And so no. So she's 0.9 of a pound deficient. Okay. And so let's look at 3 different options. We've got dried distillers grains, which is a common commodity, relatively common. All right. 20% cube, a 32% cube. Now, I know these numbers are probably not accurate right now, but you can add any number in that you have or what, you know, where you can get these feedstuffs, you know, just add your number into it if you want to carry out these calculations. And so for the next few slides, I'm going to have this table and I'm just going to start to fill it out for you. So using the same calculations that I did before, but right now we're trying to decide, well, how do I meet that 0.9 of a pound deficiency and what do I use? And so let's start off with these guys with, I've got the dry matter concentration, crude protein, here's our TDN and our dollars per ton. And so we want to figure it up. If we're trying to make a wise economic decision, we've got to determine what's the cost per pound of protein, because that's what we're worried about right now, because 9 times out of 10, that TDN deficiency that's likely there is going to be picked up through this protein supplement. And so I did some scenarios earlier today, and you know, almost every time that protein was more deficient than the TDN, if that makes sense. Okay, and so how do we start calculating this dollar per pound of crude protein? So 28% crude protein is where we're going to start with this distillers grains, and we're going to buy it on a ton basis. And so essentially within that 2,000 pounds, we've got 560 pounds of protein, okay? And it's still going to cost us $290, right? And so if I take that 290, and that should actually be a divide right there. I swear I changed that once before. There's a gremlin in here. And divide that by 560 pounds, and that tells me that it costs 0.51 or 51 cents per pound of crude protein. Okay. Oh, there it is. Okay. And so how much do I need to feed, right? And so you can see that I filled out, I went ahead and filled the rest of them out. So there's 82 cents per pound of protein, 51, 58. And so, you know, initially we think that 20% is desirable because it's a little cheaper per ton. But if we look at it on a crude protein basis, because it's less concentrated in protein, it's going to cost a little more in that regard. Okay. And how much do I need to feed? Okay, so we're going to do another quick little calculation here. Our deficiency, if you remember, was 9/10 of a pound. And we'll just use our distiller's grains in the math example and put in the 28%. Okay, so that's going to be, if you're doing the math at home, 0.2 or 0.91 divided by 0.28. Okay, so we put that in a decimal form, and that will give you 3.25. Okay, what does that mean? That means that it's going to take us, we have to feed 3.25 pounds or 3¼ pounds of distiller's grains to supply 9/10 of a pound of that protein. Okay, and so I carried that out again, and 3.25 for the DDGs, 2.8 for our 32, and 4.5. Now this isn't earth shattering to anybody because, well, if there's more protein in it, it should take less to feed them. Absolutely, but that's desirable to us if we're trying to make that decision. And we're letting the cost per ton drive that. You know, if you put it in this regard, you're thinking, okay, yeah, I'm buying a little more expensive feed, but I don't need to feed as much of it. So that's going to last me a little longer. And if you're having to haul that a long distance, it's less trips in the truck and less wear and tear on your pickup. Okay. Now, some of the challenges that we have with like these commodities is that they're, a lot of times they're going to be in a loose meal, or maybe they're even in a pellet, but the pellet durability of these is usually pretty poor. And so you've got to think about, you know, potential losses. And so we figured out when we started feeding distillers grains back a while ago, I was calculating 20% loss. If we were on sandy ground, if I could put it on a drier, hard pan, then we were probably down to 10%. Shad was thinking it was even less than that. And so, you know, if you put in a waste percentage there, you know, really getting down to the nitty gritty of trying to save money, and ensuring that our animals are getting fed what they want. And so you take that percent waste, and then you start to add that to what the amount that you need to feed. And so if you're trying to get them exactly where they need to be as far as nutrition goes, you know, you want to account for that because you're not going to get the performance you were expecting. But at this point, we're just trying to keep them alive and at least in a positive trajectory on growth. Okay, and so here's another table, the same thing, but I threw in some tubs because obviously those are very popular. The dry tubs, or you know, you have pour tubs. There's umpteen different options for you as far as those protein tubs, and I just wanted to illustrate, you know, how do those fit into this kind of situation. And so I've got two examples here. Here's a 125-pound tub. The protein content is 30%. And then here's a 200-pound tub. The protein content is 24%. Okay, so here's our crude protein percentages. And when you actually calculate, so this is $74 per $125 tub, or $59 for the 200-pound tub. But when I look at it you calculate that out on a, you know, buying a ton of these tubs, that's $1,199 per ton, or $699 a ton, right? And we're talking about protein, so I need to compare that. So if I look at that cost and put it at, did exactly what I did before, when you look at it, $1 per pound of protein, $1.99 for this one, and $1.46 for this tub. Okay, so that may give you a heart attack. I don't know, but you know, think about what it costs to put out that supplement on a daily basis or 3 days a week, however, as compared to the convenience of being able to drop that out. And so you're looking at, you know, the big challenge that we do have though, is that they're kind of, these are formulated to provide a certain level of intake. So 1/2 pound to 1 pound, and it all depends on the type of tub you purchase. This one says around 2 pounds per day intake, and that's kind of how they formulate to limit the animals to that. And so you can tell right off the bat that this is not going to be the only thing I can put out there to meet these requirements, because I've got these higher protein sources that I've got to feed 2.8 pounds per day. And so it's just not going to be sufficient, all right? But nevertheless, if they're consuming that, you're looking at 60 to 70 cents per day, all right? And what I've got on this slide here is similar to what I showed you before, but what I've done is I've expanded it just to kind of give you a sense of, you know, when my forage really starts to decline, you know, what amount am I actually going to have to start increasing as far as the supplementation quantity goes, all right? And so I want to draw your attention to what I have highlighted in yellow. And so these are the same numbers that we saw a few slides ago, but I did all the math that we just went through, made a nice little Excel spreadsheet. And to give you a sense, so with the 20% cube, if that range is really degraded and you're in that 4% range, you're looking at close to 5.6 pounds of that cube per day. That's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. All right, 3.8 pounds if that range quality. So I probably should have went the other direction and went from 7 to 5.5 to 4, and saying the fall, you know, as we come out of September into October, you know, it's going to go from here and then down to here, then down to here. But you can see how much difference there is as far as for that heifer in the third trimester, how much supplement you really need to give depending on what your range quality is, okay? And then if we fall down to this 1,200 pound cow, we see that in that third trimester, you're looking at 4.6, 2.8, 1.0. Now, I know you're gonna say, well, that heifer is a little smaller, to Dr. Scholljegerdes, than that cow. But the point is that that heifer needs a little more protein, right? Needs more concentration of protein, because she's still trying to grow herself, grow her musculature, her organs, her skeleton, and carry a calf. And so we've got a little more energy density required in the diet for those younger females than the cows. And so that's where it's kind of tough to have your heifers and your cows all together. And so ideally we'd sort those out, but we're just trying to keep things alive, like I said before. And then if we get into that 1,200 pound cow producing 20 pounds of milk, you know, I highlighted this here when we get into, you know, 4.6, 2.8. So not a lot of difference here, but we're going from 8.6 pounds a day, you know, as compared to 5.6 pounds per day. Okay. And so this is, I figured this would be nice just to give you a ballpark as to where to start, but maybe it scares you too if you've got heavy milking cows. Okay. And then it's the same thing. It doesn't look like it changed, but I actually changed it to a 32. And so it gives you a sense of what your supplementation needs would be with a higher protein supplement. And so that 2.9 doesn't sound as bad as compared to what we saw in the previous in 3.5. Okay. Now, minerals. It's something that I know we try to take for granted, and it hurts to pay that $800 to $1,000 a ton for that those minerals. But you know, going in through a drought, we're going to have significant mineral loss in those forages, and that's going to set us up for a hard time come calving season. Because if those calves are born without some of these key minerals, and the cow is, you know, deficient in some of these, you know, we start to see a decline in colostrum quality, immunocompetence, and things like that. And so this is some work from Clay Mathis and Jason Sawyer back in 2004. They did a really neat study where they did a survey of New Mexico mineral content or rangeland. And so calcium, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, sodium, sulfur, and so just general macro minerals. So these are the things that you'll see in the diet as a percentage. And throughout the course of their sampling period, you know, I've given you kind of the lowest values, and then they had some of the highest values. So it gives you a range. It doesn't really tell you a whole lot right now, but you know, we have minerals in our forages. That's what it tells us. But in a drought situation, we're probably going to be more in this lower environment than we are in that higher. Now, obviously, soil has a huge impact on mineral concentrations, but that's not necessarily covered here. Now, if we look at the micromineral content, and so our cobalt, copper, manganese, selenium, and zinc, same kind of thing. The selenium is so low that it doesn't really show up, but for the most part, has the same response, okay? And so what I wanted to show you here and make this unique in that I wanted to show you, well, what's the cow's macro mineral supply in grams per day during day 60 of gestation? Okay, and so kind of middle, 60 days post-breeding, kind of middle of the summer, starting to get into some of our rainy seasons for us here in New Mexico. And our requirement is blue. The orange is the supply. So if orange is greater or larger than blue, hallelujah, we're doing fantastic. All right, so we see sulfur. Don't worry, your water in New Mexico provides more than enough sulfur. And so we don't ever worry about that. I hate sulfur. Okay, we look at the micromineral supply. We've got, again, looks pretty good. Our selenium can be somewhat deficient. Okay, depends on where you're at in the state, of course. And so for the most part during that time, now, am I saying, hey, our forage supply is pretty good in minerals, you don't need to supplement? And no, I'm not saying that at all, because we want to ensure that that cow is getting everything that she needs, because when we get into that third trimester, like where we're at right now, that blue line is above all of the orange lines, okay? And so for all the macro minerals, look at that, potassium is pretty high as far as what her requirements are compared to the supply. And we look at the trace minerals, again, same kind of situation. And so we want those cows to have adequate stores so that when they get into these times where it's tough and, and we're trying to get out there, but we've been breaking water all day, we can't get out and refill the mineral feeders, or they're covered up with snow, they've got those mineral stores to help supply bodily function. Okay, and not a lot to talk about. There's a lot to look at in this table, but really this just gives you a sense of mineral liver concentrations, because by all means, if you start to see an increase in retained placentas or really rough hair coat, and you think you've got mineral out there, but those cows just aren't doing very well, there's a good chance they're deficient in some sort of trace mineral. At least it's a good place to start. And so you'll go to your veterinarian and they can do a liver biopsy, because that's where they store a vast majority of the minerals, and get a pretty good idea. Now, if you can't get into the vet, you can certainly take a blood sample, and this gives you a rough range, and you can send it off to the veterinary diagnostic lab and they can run these for you as well. But it really is a nice place. We've got all of our protein, but the cows still look a little rough, or our pregnancy rates aren't the best. These darn minerals can have a huge impact if they're not provided in an adequate level. All right, and to give you an idea what the long-term ramifications of this, or maybe not long-term, but in the subsequent calves, here's a project that we did in Clayton, and we had calves that came from different ranches throughout the state, and they had various supplementation levels. Some didn't supplement mineral to the cows. And if we look at the liver concentrations of copper, okay, that looks great. Where are we at as far as there's marginal, there's deficient. And so these guys weren't necessarily deficient per se, but they were approaching that. And the morbidity or the illness in the feed yard was much greater for ranch 2, right? And so we took liver biopsies as they came into the feed yard. And then, as they got sick, we compared that to if we had a biopsy or not and what the concentrations were. And it was fairly consistent that those calves that came from a place that didn't have a good mineral supplementation program had a higher chance of getting sick. Now, if you sell your calves at weaning, not necessarily something you're worried about because it's a feed yards problem, but next year when they come back to buy your calves, they may be a little more apprehensive. Now, we always have that question of, what about the injectable trace minerals? And so here's just to give you an idea of what that looks like within the body. And so this figure here describes, the initial injection, and then we see a really nice increase. And so here's plasma selenium, manganese, and zinc. We see a nice increase. And then if you look at this, it's hours post-injection. And so out to 24 hours and then out to 2 days. And so there you are getting, a really nice increase. I mean, that's why you're giving it. And it does exactly what it's supposed to do, but it's fairly short-lived. Okay, so if you've got a situation where you're receiving calves, or you think your calves are going to break, or you're sending them, if you give them a shot of this, you can really boost those mineral supplies for those animals, and particularly these three would be important for immune function. But as far as a sole source of mineral supplementation, you still need to have a trace mineralized salt out and available to the cattle in the pasture. All right. And a lot of questions come up with the high fat supplements. All right. And so what are our concerns with high fat supplements? We do not want to feed more than 3 to 5% added fat, which is, kind of cryptic the way that's written, but that's how the recommendations are. So you've got your basal fat diet, within the forages right now, those forages don't have hardly any fat, but 1 to 2% is kind of average. And we don't want to get much more than 5% additional fat. Okay. And the reason being is that it'll start to reduce intake because cows will sense that once that fat gets to the abomasum and into the small intestine, and the brain starts to get signals from the gut saying, hey, you're doing pretty good on energy. Let's start reducing our intake. And you can get to a point where they start to reduce intake beyond what that value of the added fat is. And if we get too extreme with the amount of fat, it starts to reduce fiber digestibility within the rumen. And that can be problematic, obviously, if we're trying to stretch or trying to get the most out of our resources. However, the benefits are it's 2.25 times more energy dense than a carbohydrate. So phenomenal source of supplemental energy. Okay. Fat intake will reduce forage intake. We talked about that here. So if you're in this range, she's not going to eat as much grass because she's kind of replacing that with the fat supplement. That's going to stretch her resources. All right. And most fat supplements or, the cakes that say they've got added fat, or you've got tubs that have a little extra fat, in general, they don't really exceed 5 to 10%. And you'd have to feed upwards of 50 pounds to get, of that supplement to get to the point where I'm talking that you're starting to hurt fiber digestibility. Okay. Now, if you're feeding an oil seed, yeah, okay, those are around 30% if you can find them. But, if somebody that's got like whole soybeans or whole sunflower seeds or something like that, there's some fat in there, and that actually works really well as an energy supplement. Okay. But it all comes down to making the best, most educated decision. And so this little table here that you guys can look at as you wish it just talks about the replacement rate. So if we use a range cube of 38% crude protein, it will consider that kind of the baseline. And just know if that number is greater than that, you're going to have to feed more of it. And so you can start to make some unique decisions. So cottonseed meal, right? Chances are this has a lot of that in it, but just straight cottonseed meal, you feed a little less, and so on and so forth. And so, if you're worried about protein, wheat middlings is probably not the ideal option. Even though it could be cheap, it's more of an energy source because it's going to have less than 20%. All right. But now you can kind of see, well, if I get some wheat mids and I get some cottonseed meal, maybe I could mix something up in an old concrete mixer I've got in the back and make up my own supplement and try to hit that 28% protein or something in the middle that I can balance for my cow's needs. All right. Now, when we start to use some of these co-products, we've got to be concerned about other things that come along with it. And so the distiller's grains is going to provide quite a bit of sulfur. All right. And so I just want to give you a quick rundown of what we had to do when we started feeding that distiller's grains during the drought of 2011 and 12. 5.5 pounds a day is what we were feeding because we were in really tough shape. We actually didn't stop supplementing for about 500 days because it was so bad. And so 5.5 pounds of distillers is 0.4% sulfur. That means 0.022 pounds of sulfur. Okay, who cares about that? I agree. We don't really care about that at that point. Until the cows start consuming water from the Corona Ranch, where we have a 250 milligrams per liter of parts per million sulfur in the water, okay, or sulfate in the water. And so now we've got a significant amount of sulfur coming into that animal's diet. So 0.022 from the supplement, a tenth of a pound from the water, okay? And so the problem is that we're not allowed, we should not feed more than 0.4% of dry matter in the diet as sulfur because we start to have an increase in polio, right? And so we've got our 0.22 pounds. So I've added this all up and there we are at that 0.37, okay? I kind of knew that was going to be the answer because when we were feeding this, that was my magic mark that I would try to maximize this to hit that percentage. and getting very close to starting to have some clinical issues with sulfur. But so, you know, through that 2-3 year period, we didn't have any issues with that at that level. And so but every load we had to test because it was quite variable. And that's what I said at the beginning. The beauty of going through a feed manufacturer is it is going to be consistent, right? Whereas this stuff varied quite a bit. And so that high sulfur can start to tie up copper, and then we have some immunity and reproduction issues. And so we've got to compensate that with our mineral, all right? And by doing that, I kicked the copper content of our mineral up to 2,000 parts per million, okay? And ensuring that my zinc to copper ratio is 2-to-1. And so if you've got high sulfur in your water and you want to get into some of these commodities, you got to be sure you understand what other issues there are, right? And certainly as we're coming into the spring, we're going to start to see weeds show up. And so we've got to make sure we're careful for that. And these energy supplements, if you can find something that has a little energy, and alfalfa hay works great. So 1 pound of that will replace a pound of the pasture. Obviously costs a lot more, but if you're looking for a supplement, you know, it's really hard to find hay at this time of year anyways, but that's certainly an option for you. And then forage below 7% crude protein responds very well to supplements above that 30%. They found, you know, the data would suggest that if crude protein of the forage gets above 7%, you don't see any real great additional benefit for that. So once you've hit that, you know, it's hard to say. The grass doesn't tell you it's 7%, but we can figure that out. And always keep a high phosphorus, potassium, a vitamin A, especially with as brown as our forages have been. So those cattle should have a mineral that has some vitamin A, D, and E in it, just to ensure that they're getting the appropriate vitamins as well. Okay, so real quickly here at the end, we'll talk about cows and heifers. And so, you know, everybody has their own way of developing heifers. We do a lot of stuff here. You know, we're different than where, you know, Oklahoma or Nebraska, you know, where they've got a lot of dry lot situations, and, you know, they've got stuff called rain that produces grass. And so a lot of our heifer development programs are out on the rangeland, just like, you know, any one of you guys are doing. And so we make them earn their living. So if they don't get pregnant, they're gone. And I think the result of that is an animal that's fairly resilient. And so there's a lot of work that suggests that that you can limit their growth kind of early on in their life. You know, to maybe you want to keep them on a positive trajectory, a positive plane of nutrition. But some of the work that we've done, we've seen that if we kind of limp them along at 1/2 pound or so a day, and then about 45 days prior to the breeding season, really kick them up. And so, you know, the sheep guys are thinking, oh, you're kind of doing a flushing thing, and kind of, sort of, but, you know, we're doing it out for 45 days, but we don't really see any significant impact on pregnancy. It's not bad, but it really didn't improve it. And so the whole point is that, you know, if we're shooting for this closer to the breeding season, we have the opportunity to take advantage of some spring green up, if that exists. And so we can get this a little easier, maybe not have to feed as much to obtain this. And so we can give them just a little bit to get them moving along. And then out to 45 days, we hope that we see a little green up, and then we can add a little more supplement to them and get them to that point. And we've saved some money, okay? And it doesn't have any negative effect, but it all comes down to where we're trying to target. So the general recommendation, the insurance policy, is try to get those heifers to 65% of mature body weight. Our heifers, you know, we do all these tests on these poor girls, and, you know, trying to detect when they come into becoming puberal. And we've found, you know, we weigh them every 14 days. And so we found that if we can at least get to 53% of mature body weight in our herd, this may not be the same for you, but 53% of our mature body weight by the breeding season, we don't have any difference in pregnancy rates amongst the animals, right? And what I mean by that is animals that are at 53%, you've got some that just grow a little faster, right? And they may be up in this range, or we've had experiments where we've had a little more supplement going, so they're up in the 55% range, let's say. But if they can get to at least 53%, our girls are going to be doing pretty well, okay? And just to give you a sense of what it takes to meet that, right? And so if we have a situation where we wean and our heifers weigh 550 pounds, let's say, at weaning, and then we want to get them to, 65% of mature body weight, and, whatever that happens to be. And in my situation, I said it was 1,200 pounds was their mature body weight. So that was going to take, to get to that point, she needed to gain 1 pound per day for roughly 212 days. Okay, not unreasonable. This year it would be unreasonable to get to that because it'd be too expensive. To get to 60%, 0.8 of a pound, to 53, 0.4 of a pound. So 3.8 versus 1.8 pounds of a 20% cube per head per day. All right. Work out of Nebraska doing kind of the same thing where they developed 53 versus 58%. They had a $22 per heifer lower price to get to that point as compared to that, or development cost was $22 per heifer lower for that group versus that group. Not a big difference between 53 and 58%, but I'd sure like that, right? And saw no difference in breeding or calf production traits. And they followed those girls out for 4 years, all right? And I think one thing we often forget is we have to, we do all these things to get to breeding season. If we have an AI program like we do, and then you turn them out and wish them the best of luck. And a lot of times they'll crash after that if you're putting them back out on some dormant forage and not paying as close of attention. And so at least go out 45 days after breeding if your rangeland hasn't started to green up and the quality is pretty low, okay? And for cows, I think the best is for us to get them in a good body condition, whatever that happens to be for your cows. Our cows do really well at a 4 or a 5. And getting them into that condition as they go into calving has a greater impact on subsequent fertility in the following breeding season than trying to play catch up once they start lactating, right? And so here's the historic data that you've seen 100 times, so the effects of body condition on return to estrus, postpartum, or the estrus duration, goes down as they get a little more, get a little better condition. But if you look at some of our data, hold it, there we go. We look at our pregnancy rates from 4, 5, or 6. There's not a lot of difference. And I would bet $1 that your guys' cows have had enough selection pressure like ours, that you're probably like that too. So it's not that hard to keep them in a condition score of 4, okay? And so what we definitely don't want to do is underfeed these cows during late gestation. We know enough now about fetal programming, and that's the way you feed the cow influences how that calf develops, that you can have long-term negative impacts if you do that improperly. So the old adage of, you can kind of short them during the second trimester, I don't know if I feel very comfortable with that nowadays. So at least keep them growing, and, they can lose a little weight, that's for sure. But I'm talking, losing an entire condition score during the first or the third trimester can be problematic. And then we want to make sure our mineral consumption is adequate. So finally, test your forage, test your water, because with this drought, water concentrations of the minerals is going to increase because we don't have the recharge. That's going to be problematic. If you're getting into the commodity business, test those as well, because they're not going to be consistent like what you're going to get from the feed companies. And if you want to get into something that has starch in it, go for it. But you have some danger there with acidosis. You got to feed it every day. You've got to be very careful. When I lived in North Dakota, I fed whole shell corn during the winter to try to keep those poor cows alive. And I didn't have any digestive upsets, but I fed it very sparingly and made sure there was adequate bunk space for them. We've already talked about cow requirements, and obviously calling around, because, there are other states, trucking can be problematic, but, I know Dr. Gifford, he calls everybody from here to Canada looking for hay for his cows, and he gets some good deals sometimes. All right. If we can find crop residues, that works really good. Get the pressure off of your rangeland, and then obviously keep cows in good shape during the third trimester. And with that, I will conclude.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that presentation, Eric. A couple questions have been coming in through the chat, and I'll ask you a few of those here in just a minute, but just wanted to remind all the participants, if you do have a question and you have not submitted it through the chat, now would be a good time to go ahead and do that. one of the first questions that came in, and it was already in the back of my mind, so I was glad to hear it come in, is if we think about supplementing protein to cattle grazing dormant, pretty low quality, relatively indigestible forage, and using that as a means of increasing forage utilization. From your standpoint, I'd like to hear your thoughts on how do we balance in a drought situation? How do we balance that increased utilization with the additional increase in voluntary intake that we'd see as a function or in response to that?
And that's the big challenge that we have. We're trying to get that rumen excited and doing what its job is, to break that carbohydrate down as much as you can. And the consequence of getting that thing is that they actually do a little better. And so I think the challenges is maybe trying to balance it with bringing something in that has a little more fat in it. And so something the supplements that have 5 to 10% fat, that has the potential to counteract that. And the 20% cube, so the structural carbohydrates, that come from wheat middlings and things like that, those will also stimulate forage consumption, but it's not until you get into like a fat or a starch type source where you're in a non-structural carbohydrate to where you start to see a really nice substitution effect where they're replacing that grass with the supplement. And so that's just kind of the game that we have to play. And if that's the case, then we cut back on our stocking rate just a little bit more, so we just fine tune those cows that we have there. But it's an awesome question, and I'm all for protein supplementation, but that would be the one thing that would be challenging for us at this point. But whether or not it totally eliminates an entire week of grazing for an animal or a group of animals, that's hard to say.
No, that's a good point. What's the magnitude of that, and what would
right.
be related to that? And I think you just alluded to this some in your response, and you touched on this a bit, particularly early on, is for ranchers that are on the call and beef cattle producers. What are your recommendations in terms of, you're a nutritionist, I'm a nutritionist, we get excited about feeding stuff, right? How do we try to strike that balance again of trying to feed our way out of drought situations from a supplementation standpoint versus considering finding new careers for some of those less productive or more expensive to continue to support type females in the herd?
So I think starting off with culling is got to be our early weaning's got to be our first priority. And so for every day or for every 2 days a calf has been weaned, you get 1 day of grazing back to that cow. If we think 190-day-old calf, 200-day-old calf, getting those guys off first, and then culling those older cows. Like I said, they're starting on the downhill slide of their efficiency, and get to the point where the investment that you're making and spending your feeding out of a drought, they always said, is like spending your way out of a recession. It doesn't make sense, right? But I think when 2011 and around that time when the cattle prices were so high, I think that was the first time I'd ever heard an economist say it actually pencils out, because those cows are going to be so expensive when you go to buy them back. Once you sell them, you're trying to buy that cow right back. That pencil is there, and you can do that. And so that's why I think it's so critical to do these calculations. I don't want to feed any more than I have to. I want those cows to meet their genetic potential. They don't have to be 6s or even 5s, but if I can get those cows to survive at a condition score of 4, and I would even hazard to say a 4 or maybe just a little below, if your cows are resilient enough that you figure out what you need to keep them at that 4, or maybe push them a little closer to a 4 for they're at that 3.5, because I know we don't want to get rid of those cows, and we've got some thin ones and that are like that. And we're actually doing some studies with some thin cows and some fat cows right now on campus that Shad wanted to sell, but we had an opportunity to do some studies on, they were all pregnant, but some were condition score 4, some were condition score 6. on the same exact pasture. So we're trying to figure out, well, what's going on between those, and the calf weaning weights were all pretty much the same. So there's something unique about those two groups of cows. But anyhow, I think if you can run an Excel spreadsheet or talk to extension folks, they can help you pencil it out to where you're not spending one penny over. And I'm not afraid to make a cow lose a little weight, for sure, just to keep her on. And so it doesn't have to be as expensive as we've always thought. That was a rambling on question answer to your question.
No, a lot of good information there, and I think that's an important point, that it's not going to be a one size fits all kind of situation. And I think that's a really important consideration is what is it going to cost to buy back in? And I think we'll probably hear some of the ranchers in our panel discussion here in a little bit comment on some of those things. Marcy and Craig, I don't know how we're doing time wise. I do know there's two more questions if we have time. I want to make sure we try and get to it. Would that be okay?
Yeah. So I think as you were talking about, your body condition in your cows, Eric, there was a question early on about keeping back replacements as it relates to fetal programming, these cows being under some duress this year. Could that pay benefits in those females for next year?
It depends. That's my answer. All right. And I say that because I've got two examples that address that question. And so one example is more anecdotal for us at Corona, that we were going through the 2011-12 drought. We noticed one age group of cows always had the worst pregnancy rates during those 3 years. So one of the benefits of having a multi-year drought is to kind of see some trends. So that first year, the 5-year-olds were having the lowest pregnancy rates out of the range. And then the next year, the 6-year-olds had and so they were a year older and they were still that worst group. And so then we started to try to dig through, some of knowing what we know about fetal programming. We wanted to know, okay, what did the year that they were gestated in, why are they a group that can't cope with this drought? The genetics are relatively the same from, year to year. And, is it we didn't supplement them very much because we make those cows, they'll lose some weight in a hard year at our ranch. And so, I was like, we really have to take better care of our females while they're pregnant. My other, and this is actual research so we wanted to get into the historic stuff. We just haven't got to it yet. But at the college ranch here outside of campus, they've got all the records that are, they actually had someone put them in electronic format since the 60s. And so we had a graduate student assess calves, females that were born during years of high rainfall, moderate rainfall, or low rainfall. All right. And so then they monitored those and just saw how long did that cow in particular stay in the herd. And so went out to 5 or 6 years. And interestingly, the cows that were born during low rainfall years had longer longevity in the cow herd. Okay. And so I'm like, wait, that doesn't make any sense. They've got better grass in a high rainfall year. And so, then we want to get back to, maybe they've just become more efficient, they've become more resilient. And I think that's there because some Nebraska work would suggest that's true. But I can't help but get my mind away from the idea that what happens when there's a low rainfall year, we supplement a lot heavier during that time. And so those cows that stuck around during the low rainfall year, they probably had a higher quality diet overall with the supplement, with the protein and plus the supplement on top of that. And so now we're trying to tease out, okay, what is it in the protein that's causing them to be more efficient and things like that. And so this is all fairly new that we're all a bunch of us are trying to figure out different universities.
Good.
That did not answer that wonderful question, but you know what I know now. So.
No, I think that's good information, and I think it gives us all something to consider, and at least have in the back of our minds as we try to weigh that decision of retaining replacements or not, or what level we're going to do that at. I think time for one last quick question before we got to move on, and it's really pertaining to liquid feeds and your thoughts on them specifically as how they fit into range cattle nutrition in a drought scenario.
Okay, perfect. So thinking back to the presentation where we were talking about 7%, things are good. And then as it falls below that, we need a little extra protein to help those bacteria. And one excellent source of protein, and it's not really protein, it's just nitrogen, is urea. And that works really good. So it's just a nitrogen source that the bacteria can utilize to make their own amino acids or make their own protein. And works as a phenomenal supplement until you get to about 5% protein in the rash, in the forage or below, then they need some more natural proteins. And so if you see some of those liquid supplements or the tub supplements, they're going to say, you know, upwards, you know, not more than 15% of the nitrogen is from urea. There's natural proteins in that. And so there's a lot of good work where they looked at urea supplements in low quality forages. And you don't want to get anything much above 15% of the total nitrogen coming from urea. But to get to the liquid, you know, in order for them to get that to stay soluble, you know, they'll use some urea in that. And so if your forages are really, really low, you need to make sure that, you know, it has some natural proteins, and, you know, sometimes they'll have agitators and things like that to keep the natural proteins, because they settle out. And in that's where what you have to be mindful of, because if it's really high in that urea to get the protein up, then, you know, the bugs aren't getting, or the bacteria aren't getting what they need to effectively utilize and harvest that forage. And so it's a great option for you, but you just have to be mindful of the formulation in these drought sticking pastures.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, I want to thank you one more time. Appreciate all the information you've shared with everyone tonight, and hopefully everyone took something away from it. I'm gonna hand it, go ahead, and unless Marcy has anything else to add in, I'm gonna go ahead and hand it back over to Craig, and we'll continue on with tonight's program.
All right. Thank you, Jason and Eric. And just a quick announcement. Yes, the slides and the presentations, the recordings will be made available to the audience. So if you were wondering about that, don't worry, they will be provided to you. If you've joined our previous Southwest Beef Symposia in other years, you know we have a really good trade show and excellent set of sponsors. We're a little smaller this year, but we certainly appreciate the support from our gold sponsors, New Mexico Cattle Growers and Allflex, and our platinum sponsors, Nutrition Plus and Sustainable Crop Insurance Services. Moving on to the next portion of this program tonight is actually a producer panel discussing some of the methods and situations that they're dealing with on the drought side. And I'm going to turn it over to Marcy and Bruce to introduce our ranching panel.
Thanks, Craig. I don't guess we'll go in any particular order here. I wanted to maybe let the ranchers kind of tell where they are, where they ranch, and maybe what their historical things maybe they faced, and maybe where they are right now, and maybe what their plans are. Sitting here with Neil Woodward to my left, he ranches here in Pecos County. So just because Neil's here, maybe we'll start with you, Neil.
Good enough. We're originally sheep and goat raisers, but we got out of that for various reasons and been running a cow-calf operation for the last 25 years or so. We keep our yearlings, some of our steer calves at least. So we run some yearlings, mostly cow-calf operation, though, Bruce, in central Pecos County, West Texas.
And how long have y'all been out here?
Oh, 1929, my granddad started ranching on his own. So I've been doing this since 1975 myself. So beginning to learn a few things.
And there's a few more Woodwards around.
There's several Woodwards in this part of the world.
Yeah. All right, well, good. Anybody else? Maybe we'll, Bronson, you want to maybe tell us about your part of the world?
You bet. Hi, my name is Bronson Corn. I'm in southeastern New Mexico in the Roswell area. Our family has some sheep, cattle, and goats. We're still in the sheep and goat industry. It's great. You know, right now it's kind of a great time to be diverse, because the goat and the sheep market right now is really good. So it's kind of helping combat some of the other problems that we have. But as anybody that is around the Roswell area knows, we've been in a drought for about the past 10 years. It's been real tough, and everybody that's on this panel is more than likely all in the same boat. Our family's been here in the Roswell area, north of Roswell, and then wraps around towards Captain Mountain. And we had some old family country out south of Roswell, but we've been here for about 140 years. I don't know how many years it's been good down here, but we're stubborn enough to stick around.
Seen a few dry years anyway.
Yes, sir.
Let's see, Dennis, you want to chime in?
Yes, sir, I sure will. Thank you for the opportunity to be here this evening. Excuse me. My name is Dennis Webb, and I am Director of Operations for the Rockerbee Ranch. We're located about 60 miles west of San Angelo in kind of southwest part of Texas. We are cow-calf operation. We also run a good number of Mexican steers throughout the year. We have raise our own replacement heifers and have our own, we do all of our own horseback work. We ride our own ranch horses, and we raise all of our horses right here on the ranch. The ranch has been here since 1871. It's a arid part of the country, as most people would probably know, and being dry sometimes out here is just a way of life.
All right, thank you. And then Wesley, want to chime in there from Lubbock or wherever you're at tonight?
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. My name is Wesley Welch. I'm the manager of Spade Ranches. We're headquartered in Lubbock, Texas. The main ranch is south of Colorado City. We've got 5 other locations: Canadian, Texas, Turkey, Texas, Gale, Post, and Alpine. We're primarily a cow-calf operation. If we do run stockers, they're our own raised stockers, and been in business since 1889. So glad to be here.
Thank you. Anybody got any observations on historical stuff compared to where we are right now?
Well, in my limited experience in this country, this part of West Texas we live in, you better ranch like a drought's coming tomorrow, because it's dry more often than it's anything else.
That's kind of some of what we heard last night.
Oh.
I mean, agreeing with
Yeah.
Dennis?
Bruce, I would just elaborate on that for just a little bit. We've all pretty much seen dry conditions more than once, but I think that the drought that everybody pretty much went through in 2011 taught us a lot of lessons about things that maybe we didn't really think about before. So what I recommend doing is especially in drought type areas, and have a plan in mind for a drought. Have a contingency that you can be thinking of, that you can pick up as the drought progresses. If it's, your plan will of course vary on the severity and the length of what you're going to, but if you've got something in mind that you can start with and plan on, then it does help you in the long run make the decisions that you have to make it at some point. So that's what we did after 2011. We sat down and talked about some things and just kind of come up with some ideas and like I say, just a plan. Pretty basic, but at least it's something we can think about.
Anybody else? Talk about plans and.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo what both men said. Some of the things that Spades has done I've got drought hedges in place, so to speak, just as y'all were talking about. Once we get out of the last drought, we're always planning for the next one. So the first thing that Spades does is we try to produce and run a low maintenance, moderate cow. Kind of goes back to what Eric was saying. We see that the bigger cow, the higher milking cow, requires more inputs. And so Spade's philosophy is to try to run, a 1,100 pound cow on average, keep her milk production low, not focus quite as much on the growthier aspects, and hope to be able to weather some of these storms. Some of the other hedges or things that I have in place, I try to create bladders. And so one way to do that, everybody's kind of alluded to this, but if we're able to run stalkers and keep over a calf crop, as soon as it gets dry, that's the first thing that goes. And that sure frees up some country in a hurry. I also we're primarily a spring calving herd, but I've got a little fall calving herd that's kind of been created over the years out of bad breed ups and things, but that's another bladder that I have. And so again, if it gets bad, that's not my bread and butter, the cream of the crop. That's the second thing that we'll get rid of. And so, just through stalkers and having kind of an off herd, we can lighten up in a hurry. So those are some of the things that Spades has built into place, just to get ready for the next one.
Bronson? Oh. We can't hear you.
How about now?
Yeah.
Okay. So I have to kind of echo what Wesley was talking about. There's, we've kind of put into contingency plans so many times that you start running out of contingency plans. One thing that we've started up is a dry lot for our cows. We try to row, we're getting to the point now where you're hardly able, and most people in New Mexico and Southwest Texas and everywhere, well, pretty much everywhere else, but everybody's running into the same problems. What everybody's talking about is we're running out of grass. And we've, like I said, we implemented a dry lot for our cows. And it's been a learning curve on more aspects than I could have ever imagined. But we're getting through it pretty good. We're taking in these cows, and what we're trying to do is rotate them through. And so we're trying to keep them in for 90 to 120 days and then boot them back out, bring in another set. The way that we had envisioned this deal the whole time was, throughout the growing season of the ranches, we bring in these cows and stick them in this dry lot and allow our country to grow some grass. But we haven't got to actually implement that plan. We haven't had the rain to try that. So right now we're running off of a pure survival mode. We're bringing in these cows, we're rotating them through. We have calved out quite a few cows through here, which brings on its whole new set of problems. But we're starting to figure it out. We'll never get it figured out, but we're starting to be able to get by with it. But there's options out there. Everybody's in, what works for me may not work for you. What works for you may not work for me. There's no set deal on this thing. Yes, sir.
How do you manage if they've got young calves on them and stuff? I know some people have often struggled with that in dry lot situations. What have you got any
Lots of time.
learned?
So the hardest thing is whenever you have your first calf heifers in there. First calf heifers calving out in a set of pens is never a good thing, but sometimes you just got to do it. What we've kind of found is if you're going to have first calf heifers in there that are having calves, you might as well just leave them in there for a while, because those first calf heifers, whatever calf comes up to them and wants to suck, that's her calf, and that's not the way we want it, but that's the way it turns out to be. You can You know, you can go through and implement an ID program through them to where you can trace which calf goes on which cow, and you'll beat yourself against the wall trying to keep it straight. But it can be done. It just takes a lot of time, a lot of man hours of going through and moving them around. And if you've got a problem cow, you got to move her somewhere else to keep that calf with her. I don't know what on running age cows, they run pretty good through there. We generally don't have any problems with the running age cows mothering up with their calves. They've done well.
We have a question from the audience, and this is for everybody. What is the main, oh, sorry, we just got another one. Hold on. It had to do with, have you had to reduce cow numbers recently? And what time did you start that reduction? And then in terms of feeding supplement, what do you use? And what are your calling? That's a big question. And what are your calling criteria? So if each of you want to kind of address how you attack that in terms of having to reduce numbers, what you feed, and what you cull on.
I'll start off if nobody else wants to. A little background, we run or try to run about half stocking rate of what the NRCS recommends for this part of the world. So at any given time, roughly half of my pastures are being rested. So I didn't have to cull. We went into the fall with a fair amount of old feed, so I didn't have to cull any more than normal. We have started 2 or 3 years ago keeping liquid feed out, and I'm not going to promote any particular brand. There's several different choices, of course. I feel like keeping the liquid feed out has been real good on our breed up, especially on our first calf heifers, and maintaining those cows. We started out feeding a higher protein. We didn't ever go to 38, 25% cubed is what I was feeding when we got into December. Now we're down to feeding 20% cubed, but we still have the liquid out. Luckily, I still have old grass. So I think we're getting along pretty good that way. This last week, of course, was a wreck for everybody. Our diesel tractors wouldn't start. We couldn't get any hay up. We did inventory a bunch of alfalfa hay, but I couldn't get it to the cows during all that snow and ice. So now we're kind of getting caught up there. We've gotten by pretty well through this by a reduced stocking rate primarily.
So I'll jump in there as well. We didn't have to cut back our numbers near as much simply because we're able to rotate those cows through that dry lot. We recently got to be able to send some cows over to Texas. We found some grass over there, so that helped us out quite a bit. But as far as cutting back our numbers, we haven't done as much as what we probably should. But like I said, we're utilizing this dry lot to be able to maintain those cows. The cows that we have out on the ranches, we're feeding them a DDG cube, and that stuff's at about 32% and about 6% fat. We're getting along. I'm getting along with it pretty good. As far as other sources of feed that we're doing, we're sticking out some corn stalk bales, trying to help, give them something to fill up their belly on. And throughout this whole snowstorm deal, that kind of threw everybody out here kind of got thrown into a switch on that deal. But on a normal year, where we actually get a little bit of standing forage, usually we're in that 28% cube is kind of what we stick around. We'll stick out some tubs on some of those pastures that are out further away that we don't necessarily want to drive to all the time. We've tried the liquid. It works if you've got standing forage. If you don't have a whole lot of grass, we found that it's really kicked us pretty bad. So we've cut back off of that. That's generally what we try to do.
At Spades, I've kind of got it goes back to what Dennis was saying, but it's a schedule of what we do and when we do it, if it stays dry, and I can just run through that. We haven't had to implement it fully this last year, 2020, but of course in 2011, I think we all got our PhD in drought management. So April 15th, we typically calve, February to April 15th. So starting April 15th through the 30th, we'll go through and sell all of our dry cows, and that'll usually reduce our cow herd by 5% and our 2-year-olds by 10%. April 30th, we'll move all the stockers off the ranches, and either that's through selling them or trying to find some summer grass up in, Colorado, Kansas, somewhere. If it continues to be dry by May 1st, we'll early wean and sell all of our first calf heifer calves. And also in May, we'll sell our fall born calves and those cows. The end of May, we will ship all the replacement heifers and the bulls. We'll either sell them as exposed or try to find a home up, summer grass for them. And then by August, we'll kind of get into the meat of the matter and early wean the mature cows calves. And so doing that, we can reduce our capacity by about 60%. So that's kind of our drought plan. Anyway.
Yeah, that's kind of what we do also. We the only thing we really did this year that we haven't done when the conditions are good is this year we didn't keep any of our replacement heifers. We sold all of our heifer crop this year, and we sold our ranch steers. We kept them, and we sold them probably about, I don't know, maybe 75 to 100 pounds lighter than we normally do. Part of that was because the price kind of spiked on them there, and we just felt like, let's just go ahead and get rid of them. So we moved all those off. We moved didn't keep any of our ranch heifers, but we did buy some more steers from Mexico and put back on some of this range that we were not using. And main reason for that was try to keep a little bit of income rolling around. And there again, if it got bad enough, we'd have something we could get rid of. We do kind of like what Wesley was talking about there. We're pretty much on that same type of schedule. What we do is when it gets pretty bad, like everybody else, we start going through and getting all of our older cows out, the ones that we feel like are going to cost us more money to keep up, and get them gone. And then if we have to, we can go back down to the bottom end of it, like the previous speaker was talking about, and get some of them heifers, first calf heifers out. I did, everyone knows, and I learned it, that it's just hard to do a bunch of first calf heifers when it's really dry and it's really nothing out there for them. We saw them, we had them, and they was probably trying to shed some teeth right in all that, and all they was doing was just kicking them calves off, and it just turned into a pretty good wreck. So what we try to do is monitor as much as we can the weather conditions and read the weather reports. I know I read I don't know if everybody can see it or not, but I'd read the Browning weather report. I don't know if y'all are familiar with this or not. You guys are probably smart enough, you can read it one time. I have to read it about 3 times to get all the understanding of it, but it's got a lot of good information in there. It tells you why we're in a drought and what to look for in the future and a little bit and everything. So the information's out there. You just got to hunt it up and make it work to your benefit. And that's kind of what we do. You know, we get some cows that that we feel like just not going to be as productive for us or cost us more money, than we'll get rid of them and just wait for better times. But right now we hadn't got to that part yet. We do have a fall calf herd now, kind of like what Wesley was talking about. Some cattle that in the spring either calved real late, and so we moved them over into a fall herd to kind of tighten that up a little bit. And we're running our bulls on them for about 63 days. We're trying to get 3 cycles on them to where we was running them 90 days. And we just had too much of a spread on them calves. So we're tightening that calving season up. And you know, we pretty much got it straightened out now that they don't breed this spring, then they're going to go into town. We're not going to try to hold anything and wait on it. So basically, you know, when it's dry like that, you got to make some decisions, and you don't second guess yourself. That's what I do. If you make a decision, you got to sell some cattle, sell them, and move on to the next project.
We have another panel. I posted a link to the browningclimate.com. Hopefully that's the same that puts out your publication, Dennis.
I think
Okay.
it is.
Okay, so the next question, what do you see as the main drawbacks during drought? And do you compensate some of what's going on by utilizing injectable vitamins and minerals? And then what do you do to try and maintain body condition in your calves?
So
Well, we don't use any of the we don't use any of the injectable minerals. We keep minerals out for them, and that's another thing. Minerals can get pretty intense, so the best way to do the minerals is to get you a good mineral dealer and let him take some samples of your grass and of your cattle, and let them come up with a good mineral that will fit for you, because what might fit for me may not fit for somebody else. So there's mineral companies out there that would be happy to do that and get you some information on it. I guess I forgot what the second part of the question was. So if somebody else wants to jump in, that's fine with me.
So one of the things that we also do as well is the cubes that we use, they have the mineral package that's built into them. Plus we stick out, you know, salt and mineral as well. One of the main things, you know, that we've come to realize as well whenever it comes to mineral consumption is a lot of the times in our part of the world, you know, it varies from my place to yours, but one of the things that we realized is a lot of the times they're not necessarily wanting the mineral, they're wanting the salt. And so we keep out salt with them as well. And as far as keeping flesh on the calves, you know, we have tried the creep feeding of calves out in pastures, and it has worked and it has not worked. We have gotten to where our consumption sometime was considerably too high. The average daily gain on them wasn't penciling out. And then other times there was, you know, they come in and excel. They bloom. They did way high, much higher on expectation than what we'd ever imagined. But it's a fine line where you, on your bottom dollar, if it's something that you want to go for, then go for it. But if it's something that you're going to try to pencil in and you know that it just absolutely has to work, you better try it for a little while first before you dive off and get 2 or 3 truckloads of creep feed in, you know. I forgot what the other question was as well.
Maintaining body condition was the other part of all that in your cows.
On the main body condition side of it, like I said, we utilize this dry lot. We're able to rotate those cattle through. We're able to, once they really start dropping off, we can pull them in, we can put some flesh back up on them, and then we can boot them right back out. That's the way the whole operation is planned to work. Sometimes you have to hold them in there longer than you actually want to. And there's a fine line there as well. The cheapest thing that you can do is contact a nutritionist. Barn simple. That is the cheapest thing you can do, because that nutritionist is going to be able to tell you everything within the penny per pound of what you need to do. They helped us out tremendously. Being able to get a growing ration whenever you first get the cow in there, you want to jump them up, get them good flesh, and then about 45 days in, cut them back in and make it just a strict maintenance ration. So that's kind of how we're combating it.
And I think just my two, I used to sell AccuRation with Purina, and one of the things we would always see is on these creep feed situations, if you don't have forage, don't creep feed, because you will overconsume. You'll start getting some digestive upset. They have the limiters in there to reduce your intakes, but if that's all they have to eat, that is typically what they'll do, is they'll overconsume and cost you guys a lot of money. So.
Part of that question was, what is the main drawback during a drought? And to me, we experience increased cost and decrease in production. So we're weaning way fewer pounds, but it's costing us a lot more dollars to get it done. And I would say a lot of this conversation has revolved around, care of the cows and keeping their body condition up. But gosh, there comes a point where we need to place the condition of our ranch over the condition of our cows. And if that ranch cannot sustain that cow, then we have to, pull the cord and get her gone. I think that was the biggest lesson we learned in 2011. And I know that's a hard decision to make. But when it does come back, your country will be the first to come back. And some of what Spades was able to do then was we took in cows from producers that might have held on too long and kind of found themselves in a real big bind. We became custom grazers. We took in cows and charged them per head per month. We didn't own the cows. And so we kind of eased back into the cow business that way. So I would encourage folks. I know we want to take care of our cows, but probably shouldn't do it at the expense of our country.
I'd have to agree with Wesley. We tend to forget that we're grass farmers, not just cow raisers, and that's pretty critical to take care of our country, or we can't get back in. We decrease the value of the feed. Brush comes in. Dennis mentioned not a nutritionist, but a range specialist looking at your grass for minerals. We have done some liver biopsies on some of our cow we run up along the Pecos River, and that has been beneficial. It's stressful on the cattle and costly, but if you have a mineral deficiency, a real problem, they can pinpoint it really quick. It's a real good way to get a handle on it. So we've had a mineral program for years. Like Bronson said, we keep salt out too. I don't want them eating that high dollar mineral if salt is what they're wanting, but I try to give them free choice of both all the time. And I think that's a real critical part, especially to our breed up and our body condition in the fall. So I'm a strong proponent of the mineral program.
Yeah, Wesley, you had a really good point there about the ranch and the range conditions and things, and that's something that a lot of us think about, but we probably don't jump right in and we think about the cows first, but you're right, the range conditions and trying to keep some kind of form of grass and stuff is very important. And we don't actually have a rotation system as far as rotate every 45 days or whatever. What we try to do, this ranch is divided up into 7 different camps. So what we do is we try to rotate within that camp, and we look at the range conditions and take grass samples sometimes and get some kind of an idea of what's out there. But maintaining a good range program is very important. And in the past, it's happened right here. We grazed too much, and we had to sell cows and wait for it to come back up. So trying to take care of it and maintain it the best way you can is very important. Wesley, I appreciate you bringing up that topic. That was very good.
So as it relates to not just testing your forage, do you guys monitor your range for production and utilization and that kind of thing? Or do you work with, say, NRCS on these programs just to try and kind of see the trends that your range is doing through not just drought, but in the good years?
As far as inventorying our grass, we do have it's not a high intensity type rotation, but we do have a rotation in place on our ranches. And so we're able to know how much grass we've got ahead of us for a period of time. And then, beyond that, it's just kind of horseback eyeballing it. And I think we all have a pretty good feel of when it's getting too short. And if we can use the old take half, leave half rule of thumb, we can kind of eyeball it that way. We really have not worked much with NRCS as far as year over year range inventories and things like that. Our feed companies, they do a good job of coming out and testing our forage and tonnage and things like that to give us an idea. So that's kind of where we lean on those folks for those sorts of things, the feed companies.
Yeah, we do try to monitor our range all the time. We don't normally go out and take a lot of grass samples and stuff. Like Wesley said, I've been around here long enough. I know when it's looking pretty bad and I know when it's looking pretty good. So it's what we do sometimes is we'll have the range management students from Angelo State to come out and look at some stuff and take some clippings and for some of their curriculum, and then we can get some results from that. But I think that it's always important to monitor your ranch or make improvements. I know Wesley's got the same type of brush management program that we do, and we're always removing brush and trying to improve the country and everything else. So it's important to know what's out there and what you need to do.
I don't want to shift gears too quickly here. I don't know, Marcy, if there's any more questions, but I did want to kind of get y'all's opinion. It was mentioned last night about maybe moving cattle to other states, other countries, other counties, putting wheels under them. Thoughts on that?
Yes. Like I said earlier, we were lucky enough to find some lease country in the panhandle of Texas. And so we just went with a few cows over there. And a lot of people would think that what I'm doing is stupid, plain and simple. Everybody's going to tell you that it's cheaper to take the cattle to the feed than the feed to the cattle. All right, fine. I'm hard-headed. Okay. But the way that, it's all going to depend on what body, if you're wanting to keep your cows and you're wanting to be able to move them around, then what I'm doing is working good for us. But as a general census, yes, typically it is easier to put the cattle under wheel and send them somewhere that, send them to feed. But finding enough feed to be able to send an entire cow herd or parts of the cow herd, it helps, tremendously. But most of the time, what you're going to find are these places that have 50 cows. You can send 50 cows over here, you can send 50 cows over there. Well, hell, you're spending all your time in a pickup driving around, going to all these other places. You're putting thousands and thousands of miles on your pickup a year, just by going to all these different lease places. It's really hard to find a place that's big enough to accommodate what you need at the time. So it all depends on what you want to do. If you're able to drive back and forth to all these different lease places, then that is awesome. I hope, it works. But if you're in the situation where you don't have the time to consistently drive back and forth, if you don't know the people that are taking care of your cattle, you're going to want to go back and forth to look at them all the time. If you know the person and you trust them, that's one thing, so it all depends on what you want to do. If you're wanting to spend all that time in a pickup, then get with it. Nothing's stopping you except for trying to find that grass. But there is options, there's different ways of combating it, cutting back and doing different things here and there. You can get by, as long as the good Lord will help us out here, before too long and send some moisture our way. I don't know what else to say about that at the moment.
All I can say about it is my granddad told me several years ago, said, marry your wife, not your cow, son. And that's kind of been my philosophy. It's like you said, you wear out a pickup and if you don't know the people, you can sure get in a wreck in a hurry. We've tried pasturing stock out, not necessarily running from a drought, just trying to expand and get new fields, and it could be a wreck real quick in my experience.
I'll say that's kind of how Spades got to be the way we are now. As I said earlier, we've got 6 locations and started out at Colorado City, and we droughed out there. So we got a lease in Canadian and droughed out there and got a lease in Turkey. And next thing you know, we've got 6 different locations, and that's been a pretty good hedge against drought up until 2011. When that hit and Dennis was in on this, gosh, a bunch of us got together and we sent, Spades had cows, and we sent 1,200 cows up north to Montana, Wyoming, Nebraska, and Colorado. And actually Bronson got some of them in 2012. So we kind of scattered them out. And looking back on it, we'd never really, production suffered. Conception rates weren't as good. There was an acclimation variable there it's hard to account for, but the saving grace was the market doing what it did. Now, if you're in just a stagnant market that's flat, I don't know the answer to that, but usually, or not usually, 2011 was the opposite of that. So it worked then financially. And we brought all those cows back. The ones that did breed back, we brought them back and, reincorporated them into the herd. And I think Dennis did some of that as well, didn't you?
No, we were going to, Wesley, but I just couldn't make it work. I just couldn't, I wore out pencils trying to figure it out. And we were fairly fortunate at that time that we were down on numbers a little bit anyway. So we had we're able to move some cattle around here on the ranch. We don't really, that's not really part of our plan anymore, based on a lot of reasons of where you go with them, who's looking after them. If I'm gonna have to take a crew up there and everything. So there's a lot of variables in it that it's just not part of our plan. I get asked a lot, well, what about What about burning pear? Well, that's not really part of our plan either. If it gets down to that point, then we're just gonna load them up and send them to town and maybe take a couple of weeks off and go to the coast or something. But everyone has to have their plan that works best for them. And we try to, if we have to go through it again like we did before during 2011, then we'll probably stay with the plan that we've had of just doing what we can to maintain that middle main nucleus herd of our cattle. And if it gets down to the point we got to get rid of them, then like I said, we'll just have to get rid of. We don't normally lease other ranches. Sometimes we'll buy other properties, but right now we just don't do too much of that. And a lot of that decision was made on the cost, but a lot of it was made on us being a corporate owned ranch. There was some legal stuff in there that the lawyers got involved in, and it just wasn't going to work out contract wise, I don't think so. So we just that's not really part of our plan.
So we have $1 million question from Kelly Giles that we might wait for the last one, sort of a big one. But I have a couple questions myself. When the rains do come, and according to some of what was said last night, they are, and we've seen kind of a gradual shift in our monsoon seasons, a little bit later, and that every indication from last night is that's going to be true again this year. Have you given thought about adjusting your normal management and breeding seasons to accommodate maybe a later monsoon season? So yeah, that's kind of has anybody thought about that yet?
Yes, and we that it's something that we've definitely talked about, and it makes sense. If you think about it on a primal level, wildlife, that's what they do. Their biology tells them when to breed, and instead we're trying to tell our livestock when to breed, for convenience sake for us. Down the road, yes, I believe that we are going to have to start shifting more towards breeding on when we get the weather. But then again, you got to take into consideration those, if we're going to be getting those summer rains and not getting anything in the spring, when we typically breed, our calving season is generally starting in about the middle of February. But if we have to start rolling into doing this, breeding when we get the moisture to get those cows to breed up well, without pushing them as hard as what we're wanting or what we're doing now, then in our part of the world, what we have come to realize is fall calving cows are great, but they're very expensive. And maintaining a fall calving cow herd in southeastern New Mexico is quite tough. Given the situation that we're in, we can combat it a little differently than what we have been in the past. But that's just a bridge that we're going to have to cross sooner than later, unfortunately. But it's something that you're just going to have to sit down and you're going to have to sharpen that pencil and get a pad of paper and figure out if it's something that you can do. Just keep that in mind, though, is if you're following the weather pattern to be able to breed in your livestock, you got to take into consideration that you got to feed them things throughout the wintertime when they're sucking calves.
At our Alpine Ranch, it would be more of a monsoonal type rainfall pattern there, and we calve from April to June. Somewhat like Bronson said, calving on green grass like Mother Nature intended. On our ranches closer up towards Lubbock, I'd love to calve a little later, but then we run into the problem of mesquites leaving out, and it's hard to get good gathers, and there's some logistical problems there. But we noticed there at Alpine, our conception rates are as good as anywhere. Really, our weaning weights, we do wean later. We'll wean in December, and our weaning weights are just as stout as at any other ranch. And our feed costs aren't as high. So I think if at all practical and possible, it sure is good to try to time your calving with green up, or as close to it as possible.
Yeah, I agree with that too, Wesley. We try to do that ourselves, and we don't, we don't really chase the weather around. We normally get some good rains. Matter of fact, it's supposed to rain here tomorrow night, but I don't know if it will. I hope it does, but we should usually get some good rains early spring that really gets that grass up and everything. And that's kind of the key to it here. If you can get a good spring and start off good, then you can pretty much stretch out through summer. The problem is when you don't have a spring, as y'all all know, and then you just have summer all year long, and it can get pretty tough that way. But yeah, watching the weather and kind of making sure that whatever part of the country you're in, that you're trying to get that as close to the green up as you can, and get them cows started back right.
What I see in our part of the world, a little different, especially where y'all are at Lubbock and up in around the Roswell area, Bronson. If we have any fall moisture at all, which is when our better moisture typically comes, we can have a really good winter and early spring. Now, we seldom have a real spring with grass, but we have a lot of good weeds down here. So what we have found, we're not having a problem, this winter being an exception. It's been an awfully brutal cold winter. We don't really have a problem. We calve January, February, March typically. If we've got any weeds at all, that's probably our best nutritional time in this desert we're in. So I don't know, the summers get so hot that we could try to chase the weather if the rains come at a different time. We just sit back and pray for a hurricane, hit it the right spot, and that pretty well sets us up.
You got to be careful where you say that about them hurricanes. I said something about hurricanes one time, and some of them guys down on the Gulf Coast, they didn't think too much of that. But if a hurricane will hit down around Brownsville and come right up the river, then we can really benefit from it. But,
you're right.
You just got to be careful where you say that at.
So Bruce, if you're okay with it, we might end on this last question. This is from Kelly. What do you guys see in the future for the cow-calf business and the beef industry as a whole? Well, that's kind of a whopper, but appreciate your feedback.
So I'm optimistic. You got to be optimistic. But I am optimistic in the fact that some of the trade deals that we had going on, we've got, like we were listening to, and I can't remember his name last night, but, our exports are going up. Cow numbers are down, for the near future. I'm optimistic on the side of hopefulness, that the operations that we're in now, I don't want to say be extremely prosperous, but as far as the calf prices, everything is setting up right for us to be able to excel. With the way that some of the current things that might be happening in Washington, D.C., that might tell a different story, but the way everything has been moving, we're heading towards our upward trend. I just can't help but that we're gonna come out of this smiling more than what we expect.
I agree with Bronson. I mean, on a supply standpoint, our cow herd's been shrinking. You know, we're contracting. So I see that as a bullish indicator. You know, our beef demand has just been off the charts, both domestically and internationally. I think we're producing just such a good product. You know, I don't know the numbers offhand, but you know, our quality grades have just shot up through the roof. And we saw all throughout the pandemic, beef demand remaining strong. I think the consumer really enjoys and appreciates the consistent good quality eating experience that they're getting now through the beef that we've been raising. And we've come leaps and bounds since 2011 as far as our genetics and what we're producing. And I think we are on the verge of getting paid for it and rewarded for it. I don't think we'll see levels like we did in 13, 14, 15, but you know, I think we could approach some real sustainable, lucrative levels. But it's like they always say that the best cure for low prices is low prices, and the best cure for high prices is high prices. So we'll manage to expand the herd once it gets good, and you know, it's a cycle. So, but I think we're on the upward swing.
Yeah, I would have to agree with both of y'all on that. I think it's good. I think the second and maybe third quarter this year, we're going to see some really good prices. Like I said, the supply and demand, and you know, I feel so good about it. I'm trying to buy some more steers right now to hit that, maybe that third quarter somewhere. So, you know, it's just, you got to kind of be willing to, in this business, y'all know, you kind of got to be willing to take some chances on some things sometimes, and make it beneficial for yourself. And right now, it does look like that the numbers are down and the demand is up. So we want to be able to be, everybody needs to be in a position where they can have some product to sell when it hits them times. So yeah, I feel good about it. The cow-calf operations, I feel good about the industry all the way around. I don't think some of these things that are going on is going to hurt us. You know, the pandemic thing, as Wesley said, we stayed pretty true through that as far as demand and stuff. Washington, you know, nobody knows what's going to go on up there. I don't think they even have a clue what's going to go on up there. So all we need to do is produce our cattle and sell them and enjoy our life. And the things we can't control, there ain't nothing we can do about it.
I think we all have to be optimistic to be in this business anyway. But one thing about a drought, it seems like every time we come out of a hard drought, our genetics improve. And so that's one way to, I guess, a silver lining to that cloud. We'll come back with better stock when we do. But if they'll get their backs wet, we're going to be all right. I think things are really looking our way.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have any more questions in the chat, Bruce. So if you want to.
I would again like to thank everybody that helped, and I'd sure like to thank all y'all out there that have helped get the word out on our new format and way of doing business this year, especially county agents in Texas and New Mexico have helped get the word out on this some too. So thanks as always to y'all, and thank all of you for your time tonight, and everybody else for their time tonight. So
good. I was glad to do it. For anybody out, and you know, if anybody's curious more about kind of what we're doing, I'm not the sharpest marble in the bag, but I'll sure try to help you out any way I can. kind of the program that we're using. So look me up. If anybody needs to get a hold of me, you can contact Marcy. She's got my contact info as well.
Yeah, I'd say that same thing. And also I just, for the listeners and the attendees and everything, the only thing I would say is don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to ask for information. There's a lot of stuff out there through your county agents or NRCS or most anybody that will give you, will help you if you're having some struggles or you don't know how to feed or what to feed, and just don't be afraid to ask for the information, because it's out there. And you know, people like us, we don't know everything, but we do know some things we've been through. So and there's ranchers all over that can help you out. So just don't be afraid to ask for the information.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And Bruce, I think that wraps up tonight, and we start tomorrow it's a little earlier. Is that right, Bruce? It's 4. Is that correct, Mountain?
Correct. Yeah, 4 Central, 3 Mountain tomorrow afternoon.
3 Mountain, excuse me. Yeah, so 3 Mountain tomorrow. So it's a little earlier program. Use the same link to log in, and I hope we see everybody tomorrow.
All right, very good. Y'all have a good night.
All right, thank you guys. Thanks everyone for coming out.
Bye guys, have a good night.
Hey, Marcy, if you get a chance before you call it a night, if you can export the attendance report for this as well, that would be great. Then I can wrap up the CEUs. And if there is anything else you want me to include in the email, I know I'm waiting for Brian's presentation from, was it just last night? Because it feels like 3 nights ago. So
Yeah.
I'm waiting for his, and then, you know, because I was going to send individuals individual emails per event just based on their attendance.
Oh, okay.
Tonight, go ahead.
Like Steve Lucero, for example, he registered, but he missed last night, and then something came up and he missed tonight. So he's not going to show up as a user, but he wants the
Presentations.
Yeah.
What the easiest way probably just to manage that is, I mean, once we get them posted to the website, we can just direct folks to the website. But it was just, I mean, I don't mind sending them to everybody in the email that registered, but we've got up to 200 folks now. So that's why I was just focusing on those that attended, getting them the resources. After that, we post on the website and direct folks there, especially since the recording link may take a little bit longer, because I'll still need to get that from you. Tonight's event, I do